Hello, everyone. Welcome to our live podcast in Reconnected Social. We're going to be discussing reclaiming connection in a peer-orientated world based on the book that our community have been tuning into over the last month, and that is Hold On to Your Kids from Dr. Gabor, Maté, and Dr. Gordon Neufeld. So pumped to be here with you guys. Hello, hi everyone. So curious about who has read the book, and its paradigm shifts in peer orientation versus parental power. Very fascinating paradigm shift for me. When I read this book, it all of a sudden just made so much sense to me about some of the difficulty that I experienced in my teen years. I was absolutely not brought up with the perspective around having your parents be your primary source of attachment. In fact, like growing up in the 90s and the early 2000s, it was very much talked about like you should spend a lot of time with your peers. It's so important to have peer group experiences at the helm of everything. It was the era in which like your parents just dropped you off at your friends' houses all the time. And when I read this book, I was really I had mega ahas about how many of my decisions I had made as a teen and young adult that were peer-driven decisions. That I was very much attached to my peer group more than my parents, and so I was learning from quite immature nervous systems and making decisions based off more about what my peers were into than what were probably just like more grounded adult based co-regulated experiences. So when I read that book, I got a lot of compassion for myself. I was like, oh, I actually didn't have much hope. Like I was very much like just relating to life through my peers. I was driven by a lot of my connection to them. Yeah, and I remember, Eleanor, when you first read this book, you also had some ahas because you had teens in the house.
Hey everyone, good to see you. Nice to be tuning in for the podcast session today. When I first came across this book, just had it a second ago. I really enjoyed the I guess like from working as a counselor, one of the things that we do as a counselor is we support parents to like feel okay about what's happening and then find strategies, obviously, to like deal with and hopefully create some positive change. So one of the strategies that we use is normalizing, which is like just basically, you all know the feeling of how of going into like a play group and maybe you've had a hard night's sleep and you might be feeling really terrible about it, but then you hear that someone else has also had a terrible night's sleep or someone else's kid is doing something similar, and it gives you a feeling of relief because you know that you're not alone. So that's an experience of like having your challenges normalized. And because I was working with a lot of parents of teenagers, I realized that a lot of what was happening in like that mainstream space was kind of normalizing the peer orientation. So like what I mean is a lot of parents would struggle with behaviors like their kids being rude to them, their kids not wanting to spend time with them, their kids feeling like they couldn't get through to their children and feeling like they didn't have much authority over their children, in a positive sense, in the terms of if they were to have risky behaviors, would they listen to the guidance of their parents, or would they come to their parents if they were in a tough time? And most parents would feel reassured by knowing that even if they didn't have them, they were like, they did have good friends, you know. And I just realized that a lot of what was happening even in that counseling space, it was well-meaning, but it was definitely normalizing the peer attachment. So, you know, just letting parents know, yeah, that's something that happens during childhood, during teenage years, especially as they do. That is something that does happen. It's pretty normal, you know. But not really noticing just how much as a society we normalize this separation. And, you know, actually the first place I got a glimmer of this was in maybe 2017. My family and I took a year off to travel. We traveled all through Southeast Asia. We went to Cambodia, Myanmar, Thailand, Vietnam, Laos. We moved together as a family all through all of these Southeast Asian countries. And we'd actually made that decision because of a couple of our teenagers. Like my eldest daughter was, I'm gonna have to take a guess now because it feels so long ago, but I was probably 14. It was like year 9, 10. And she had really just gotten in with the wrong crowd. And it felt like we were having this moment like, wow, we could completely change the trajectory of this, but we're going to have to do something pretty dramatic. And so we packed everything up. We rented out our house. We put everything in storage. We started the trip in a 6-seater Brits van or whatever it is, and we drove from near Sydney, all the way to Darwin, and then flew to Southeast Asia from there. We drove up right through the Red Centre. And what I didn't realize we were doing at the time was what Gabor, Maté, and Dr. Gordon Neufeld would call collecting. It was like a pretty dramatic time, and I definitely lent on all of my play therapy skills and breathwork skills to work through really the rupture in our relationship, so that I could fully step back in as that attachment person to my kids when my kids had, especially my eldest teens, like were looking mostly to their friends for their relationship needs. But I didn't even know that's what was happening. It wasn't until years later that I read Hold On to Your Kids, which has been kind of one of the main parenting books that I've lent on as a parent of teens. And I looked back, and, you know, by the end of our trip, my eldest daughter knew exactly what she wanted to do. She was having fun with her siblings again. We could share and talk, and she was still fiercely independent because that's definitely her nature. But there was not the same rejection. Or do you know how Gabor, Maté, and Dr. Neufeld talk about the dismissive, like, coolness and detached behavior? There was no more coolness. It was like we were having fun, we were playing. And I can track the change in our relationship through the lens of this book so profoundly. So when I read Hold On to Your Kids, it just made sense to me, because I had been trained in mainstream kind of therapy. I did before that have an idea, oh no, a lot of these are normal, it is okay. But actually, if we look at it through the lens of attachment theory, we see a totally different picture.
Yeah. And one of the main quotes from the book is, when primary attachments compete, one will lose out. So the child will either orient to their peers or their parents. And who is learning that for the first time? That piece of information for me was such a light bulb moment. Like, I was like, wow, nobody has ever told me that. That's like the first time that I'm ever having the knowledge that there is a competing need of attachment, and how much society has, it really undermines the parental attachment today. You know, like, parents are so busy, kids go to school, you know, kids often are in daycare when they first come, and then they go to school, and now there's screens, and kids are like on social media with their friends even when they're outside of school. There's just so much that undermines this parental attachment that a lot of parents don't even realize that this is what's happening for them. And I'm curious if, when you hear that statement about when primary attachments compete, one will lose out, you'll either orient towards peers or parents. What's a moment for you where you felt that your child's attachment has shifted away from you? Just reflect on that.
Would you share a little bit more, like Catherine's saying, is that competition between parents or between the parents or the peers? Will you explain a little bit more about what it might look like?
Yeah, so it's about, like, if you know, when you feel really connected to your child, that they will come to you to share what's going on for them, and you'll be able to, if you can hold space for those feelings, they will feel safe to connect with you in those experiences. But when it's shifted to the peers, they're orientated to their peers for guidance and for security, and so therefore they won't share with their kids, they'll share with their peers. And I have a very significant experience in my own teenhood where I had something happen with a boy when I was younger, and I'd felt like my boundaries had been really crossed. And at this point, I felt really disconnected from my parents. My mom was so unbelievably stressed and under pressure. She worked double shifts at work, and so she was always busy, and she always, like, it was just really normal for me to be dropped at other kids' houses. I had 20 cousins, so I spent a lot of time with my cousins. And at this phase of my life in high school, I had a lot of friends that I could orient to. And I navigated through that very intense experience that was extremely overwhelming and scary for me, just purely with my peers. It wasn't actually until I was in my mid-20s and I had some integration and healing that I shared that with my mom when I finally felt safe to. And that's kind of what he's talking about in the book. It's like, instead of borrowing the maturity of the adult attachment around us, we're borrowing that from our peers, and so therefore actually being led by immature nervous systems.
Yeah. And we think about this, it means like this is not a conscious, the thing about attachment to remember is it's not a conscious, intentional thing that we do. It's actually automatic, habitual survival need. So we actually need connection to survive. And if you think about it, it makes a lot of sense. Think about a newborn baby. If someone doesn't connect with them, then they won't even physically survive. So we're born with attachment eliciting signals, which means that, crying, smiling, looking for eyes. Like babies are wired for connection, for relationships, and to elicit from the people around them the connection that they need that will then keep them physically alive. Because we can't actually even change our own physical temperature when we're newborn. We can't, like, if there was not an adult there, we wouldn't survive. So just emphasizing that to give you a sense of just how much connection is a survival need. And then connection is such a survival need that even think about now as an adult, if something shocking or bad or hard happened to you.
If you want to keep listening, jump into Reconnected Social and start your free trial today.